Hi, today is August 6th, 2019. My name is Ray Silverman. I teach religion at Bernatton College. Today's talk is a continuation of our series on the Ten Commandments. We are talking about the commandment, do not murder. Just 3 words. Or you might say, thou shalt not murder, up here on the chalkboard. Thou shalt not murder. That's a commandment, but it's also a promise. In the Hebrew, it's simply no murder. There'll be a time in our lives as we continue to strive to keep the commandment that we won't have any murderous thoughts. And by murderous thoughts, it's not just taking a person's physical life, but thoughts that demean and stab people in the back. And I remember one time I was teaching in the prisons, and someone said that someone had stabbed him in the back. And I thought, because it was a prison setting, it had happened literally, but he meant it metaphorically. The person had said bad things about him behind his back, stabbed him in the back. So we know that this commandment has lots of deeper levels. It's not just about physical murder. I want to speak, though, first about the Ten Commandments in general and why they're so important, or just simply why the Ten Commandments. A lot of people will say things like, yeah, I know the Ten Commandments. I learned them back when I was in elementary school or in church school. And now I want some real meat. I want something deeper. Swedenborg was once talking to some devils. This is at the end of the book In Jude of Love. And they said, the Ten Commandments. What has that children's book have to do with us? Well, the Ten Commandments are not just for children. They are actually something that contain all of divine truth. They're actually the first thing taught, even though we read Genesis first, the first of the word is the Ten Commandments. And God said all these words. Oh, God said all these words. So why the Ten Commandments? I made this chart, actually my daughter made it for me many years ago. You probably can't read it where you're sitting from, but it's just pretty to look at anyway. So there's 4 quotes from the writings here, and each one really captures the essence of what the commandments are about. The first one says, get a head start on heaven. Well, it's kind of nice to get a head start on heaven. If you were going to go visit Venice, let's say, you might want to get a head start. You might want to get packed. You might maybe want to get a travel guide, find out what's going to happen there. Get a head start on heaven. This says, the life of heaven in a person is living in accord with the Ten Commandments. Wow, we get a foretaste of heaven in this world by living in accord with the Ten Commandments. That's a mighty big promise. Here's another one. Become an angel. To do these commandments from religion purifies the internal person, opens heaven, admits the Lord, and makes the person, as to his spirit, an angel of heaven. So we get to become angels of heaven right here and now by practicing the commandments. I love what Corey said when he was referring, someone came to the Lord and tested him saying, what is the greatest commandment? And the Lord said, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And the second is like unto it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And then Corey, putting it in contemporary language, said, Jesus said, right on. Live these things. And that was so good. Right on, live these things. So you can know it, but you have to live it, which is core to the new church. Experience God's presence. People talking about, wanting to connect with God or having a personal relationship with God or whatever that means for people. Experience God's presence. To love the Lord is to keep the 10 commandments of the Decalogue. In proportion as a person keeps and does them, in the same proportion the person loves the Lord. The reason is that the 10 Commandments are the Lord with a person. The 10 Commandments are the Lord with a person. This sort of goes along with John saying, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. These 10 Commandments are God with us. That's very, very powerful. And finally, going back to what I said before about why the 10 Commandments, and didn't we just do that when we were children, and now we're finished with that and we're ready for something else? This one is from Canon Celestia 8899. The 10 Commandments are the rules of life, both for those who are in the world and for those who are in heaven. So you don't just finish it here in this world and then get to heaven. We're still keeping the 10 Commandments as the rules of life in heaven. So they're a very, very big deal. My students often like to say, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. I say, well, what do you mean by spiritual? They have lots of different definitions. And I say, well, let me tell you what Emanuel Swedenborg says about being spiritual. And here's his definition. This is again from the Apocalypse Revealed. Spiritual life is acquired solely by a life according to the commandments. And those are the commandments of the Decalogue, as he goes on. Here's another one that's very, very interesting. Have you ever heard this famous phrase from Swedenborg? All religion is related to life. And the life of religion is to do good. Right. We all know that, right? Mm-hmm. All religion is related to life, and the life of religion is to do good. Usually we end it right there. That's the beginning of the doctrine of life. But it's called the doctrine of life from, here's the actual title, the doctrine of life for the New Jerusalem from the 10 Commandments. So, all religion is related to life. The life of religion is to do good. But no one can do good. It continues. No one can do good from himself, because all good is from God, except that he shuns evils as sins. Continuing. But what evils are sins? The 10 Commandments describe what evils are sins. And then the rest of the doctrine of life is about the 10 Commandments. So we can't just leave it at all religion is related to life, and the life of religion is to do good. That is so true. The beginning is really important, and that's the end as well. But the means to get there is through the commandments. So in the 1990s, I had the great good fortune of teaching in the maximum security prisons in Atlanta. And I went in there, and the course was called Christian Ethics. And so I thought I would just teach the 10 Commandments course in prison. And on the first day, I said, you know, many of you may have heard the story of Jesus being confronted by the rich young ruler, and the rich young ruler said, "Good master, what good thing shall I do that I might inherit eternal life?" Jesus said, "Well, why do you call me good? There is only one who is good, that is God. But if you want to enter into life," then I stopped. And it was about 30 men in the room, you know, with their white uniforms and their blue stripes. And this is in the South, so a lot of them had good Southern Baptist upbringing. I said, you know, so what did Jesus say if you want to enter into life? And a lot of them said, "Sell what you have and give to the poor." I said, well, that's a really good answer, and Jesus gave that a few verses later. But that's not the first thing he said. Does anybody know the first thing he said? If you want to enter into life, nobody knew. I said, Jesus said, keep the commandments. Oh, so the rich young ruler said, which ones? And Jesus took him right back to the 10 Commandments. He mentioned, you shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor, you shall No, and he added, you should honor your father and mother. He took them back, he broke it down. And the guy said, wow. And that experience was amazing, teaching the Ten Commandments in prison to prisoners who said, this is the real deal. They really got it. That was a beautiful experience. It truly was. And our first book, Rise Above It, Spiritual Development Through the Ten Commandments, about a third of the journal entries in this book are from the prisoners. We had a whole bunch from when Star and I were teaching in Africa. We had the Africans doing the course as well. We had lots of different settings. We had little children's groups. We have some of the quotes from the children in here. It was a really fun book all the way around. But we used this book for 18 years teaching in college too. This was the textbook for the students. And after 18 years, we made a new book specifically for the college students. This book was called Rise Above It, Spiritual Development Through the Ten Commandments. Lots of Swedenborg in here. In this book, Rise Above It, Spiritual Development for College Students, lots of Swedenborg in here, but we don't quote him as directly because we wanted to get this book on as many college campuses as possible, and we didn't want it to appear that we were proselytizing for the new church. So it's written differently, but the opening of the inner meaning of the Ten Commandments is the same in both books. Okay. And in the back of this first book, we have a quote from Swedenborg, and it says, every religion has teachings similar to the Ten Commandments, and everyone who lives according to the commandments is saved. Now this is one of the most beautiful things about the new Christianity. We totally believe that God came into the world as Jesus Christ, and we can proudly proclaim ourselves to be Christians. At the same time, we can also say that everyone in every religion can be saved. Every religion has teachings similar to the Ten Commandments, and everyone who lives according to the commandments is saved. So it's a very inclusive Christianity. So let's talk about the Ten Commandments, and specifically in this portion of our study, the commandment about murder. How many ways can we murder someone? We're going to do a little brainstorming right now, and I'm going to jot things on the, you know what? I used to say blackboard. Can't say that anymore because these are green. Now you have to say whiteboard. But we're going to call this the chalkboard. I'm going to jot some things on the board as you think of them. And if you don't want to shout it out, you can just whisper it to your neighbor. That's fine too. How many different ways can we collectively come up with ways that we murder our neighbor? So let's, yes.
Ruin their enthusiasm.
Oh yes, thank you. Ruin their enthusiasm.
Yeah, oh, you can't do that.
Who can? Ruin their enthusiasm. Thank you, Lois. Yes?
Gossiping.
Gossip, classic. There's a classic. There you go. Gossip. Is that it? Have we run out?
Not even acknowledging their down.
Not even acknowledging, not noticing them,
Just
not, yeah.
Turning a face away and not looking at a person.
Does that happen at camp?
Sometimes.
Even at this glorious Freiburg New Church camp, sometimes someone will walk right past you and not notice you, acknowledge you, and it's a way of murdering. Yeah. So did you call it ignoring or?
Oh, ignoring.
Ignoring, yeah. See, excuse me, I'm not invisible. Ignoring, yeah. Thank you.
Excuse me.
Yes. Yeah.
Questioning or just putting down their ability.
Questioning or putting down their ability, yes. want to ask you if you wouldn't mind giving a little illustration of how that might take place. Say you're a teacher.
Well, I think about, a lot of kids, even adults will tell me that, as a child, they were told, well, they'll never, you'll never amount to anything, or you could never be, a scientist, or you could never do this, you don't have the ability.
I know. Can I tell you a sad story with a happy ending? Well, I was in the 2nd grade. Star knows this story. Do you want to tell it for me? No, okay. So we were singing a song in class, and I was belting out the verses because I love this song. I didn't know why I loved it so much. I was belting it out, and my teacher told me that I had to mouth the words because I was rooting it for everybody. And ever since then, I've always felt like backing off, except today, miraculously, we sang that song. Did you pick it out, Corey?
Yeah.
It was the Battle Hymn of the Republic. And I belted it out.
Good for you.
And as I belted it out, I thought, oh my goodness, this is what the new church is all about. The Lord's second coming. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. Oh my goodness. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Wow, wow. It just felt so good. But putting down inability, and it was crushing, for most of my life. Yes.
Yes, my sister-in-law had the same experience, but hers was even a little worse, I think, because when we went to school, everyone had to be in Glee Club or the chorus. They didn't pick people that could sing to be in it. Everyone in the class had to do it. And so she was singing, and the teacher, right in front of the whole group, came up to her and told her, you cannot sing, so please just mouth the words, and so that you don't ruin it.
Wow.
And she remembers that to this day, and she
Yeah.
doesn't have a happy ending because it's still there.
Yeah. So we can really ruin someone's enthusiasm. We can gossip about people, destroy their reputations. Just simply ignoring them, treating them like they're invisible, questioning or putting down their ability. I think there were a few more. Yeah.
Doing something that impinges upon their livelihood, like, somehow ruin their crops or something like that, that you're doing something for yourself that hurts their ability to support themselves and their family.
Right, yeah, so he says impinge upon their livelihood. Yeah. Impinge upon another's livelihood. Yeah, very, very. Let's take a couple more. George?
The quote I like in the writings goes like this: "It is not angelic to point out the faults of another unless at the same time you point out their goods."
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, so we'll
the
say-
murderer only wants to focus on the negative
Right,
without seeing anything positive.
right, thank you. So focusing on the negative.
Being an angel of seeing the good and the bad.
Right. So I'll say the focus on faults. And the faults may be there, but that becomes like the center thing. Yeah, focus on faults. Good. Yeah, a few people have been talking about walking backward to hide the Father's nakedness, and the idea in the internal sense there being to excuse with all your might and to put the best interpretation of people's actions. So important. But we become murderers by just focusing on faults. And this all leads to destroying a person's enthusiasm, taking away, yeah.
Wishing a person ill will. In other words,
Simple
kind of,
wishing.
not really wishing, it's almost like wishing them to hell.
Yeah, or I just wish they would die.
Yeah.
You could say that, and that, isn't that murder? It's not physical murder, but
Right.
but in spirit it is. And that's
Wish
what
you were
really
gone.
Yeah, wish
Yeah.
you were gone, that's right. Okay, so wishing ill will. All right, so I think we have a nice collection. Give yourselves a big round of applause for a great response there. Yeah. Oh, Ken, go
I
ahead.
said, when turning them away if they come to you for help.
Oh, turning them away when they come for help, yeah. I'll put it over here, turning away. We do that for children, don't we? No time now, you know, turning away when they come for help. Okay, so we're gonna pretend we're a deaf crowd and we're gonna give everyone a big thank you for that.
One more.
Okay, good. All right, so what do we got next here? Okay, so scripture quotes. Yes, so you remember I mentioned that this quote about every religion has teachings similar to the Ten Commandments? Well, in the book for the college students, there's 4 or 5 pages of an analysis of how the Ten Commandments show up in all the major religions of the world. Because this is done as a course in world religions. This book is not a course in world religions. This book is just for people who are interested in putting the Ten Commandments into their life. But it does begin, each chapter begins with a very, very brief summary of that commandment in the world religions. And here's how the commandment against murder occurs in the world religions. And here we end the summary with a quote from Swedenborg. It's the icing on the cake, or it's the crown that has a place for all the gems of all the religions to shine. You've heard about the new church as the crown of all the churches, and we take that to mean it's like a crown where there's a place for all the gems. And I think you'll see how this takes place here. Okay, in the Old Testament, you shall not murder. In the New Testament, he who hates his brother is a murderer. In Islam, whoever slays a soul shall be as if he had slain mankind altogether, and whoever gives life to a soul shall be as if he had given life to mankind altogether. From Buddhism, from the Noble Eightfold Path, right action is to abstain from taking life. Notice how that's written. It's written in the what not to do. Right action is to abstain from taking life. And now, the grand summation from the Doctrine of Life for the New Jerusalem. If a person shuns an evil as a sin, he comes into the good opposite to the evil. The good opposite to the evil, which is meant by murder, is the good of love towards the neighbor. We have murder and we have love. Now, when Jesus was on earth, he said we had to learn how to love our enemy. People say, come on, it's hard enough to love my neighbor. I can't even love my wife sometimes, or my husband. You know. I have to love my enemy. Really, it's impossible. Well, it sort of is impossible. I mean, just the whole thing of love your enemy. What? That was brand new. That was brand new. In the Old Testament, they didn't teach love your enemy. They did teach love your neighbor, but they didn't teach love your enemy. That was a brand new thing that Jesus brought into the world. And he said that it is possible, but that's God's love. So how do you get God's love into you? How do you do the impossible? I want to tell you a story about someone who once did the impossible, or what people thought was impossible. And part of why I want to tell you this story is you hear a lot young people being encouraged to, you can do anything. If you get your mind right, you can do anything you want. Well, it's not totally true. You know, the kid who is 5'1" and maybe overweight is not going to be first string in the National Basketball Association, no matter how hard he tries, you know? He's just not built that way. But there are other ways that people can excel and do things that seem impossible. Many years ago, there was a fellow named Roger Bannister. Is this familiar?
Yes.
And Roger Bannister was a 24-year-old medical student in Oxford, and he was in a race. And people had said that, well, Roger said he was going to try to break the 4-minute mile. And the doctors and the scientists said that this was physiologically impossible. No human being could do it. And if they tried, it was also dangerous. Their lungs might burst. In our new book, that story is in here. Every chapter begins with a little story in this book. So I just wanted to share a little bit of the story and how Bannister himself describes the story. As the gun fired, Chris Brasher went into the lead and I slipped in effortlessly behind him, feeling tremendously full of running. My legs seemed to meet no resistance at all, as if propelled by some unknown force. A voice shouting, "Relax!" penetrated to me above the noise of the crowd. I learned afterwards it was Stamfels. Stamfel was his coach. It was Stamfels. Unconsciously, I obeyed. I barely noticed the half mile passed in 1 minute 58 seconds. I was relaxing so much that my mind seemed almost detached from my body. It was incredible that we could run at this speed without strain. I was barely aware of the fact that Chris Chataway was now going into the lead. At 3/4 of a mile, my effort was still barely perceptible. The time was 3 minutes, 7 seconds, and by now the crowd was roaring. A 4-minute mile was possible. Somehow to do it, I had to run the last lap in 59 seconds. Chataway led round the next bend, and then I pounced past him at the beginning of the back straight, 300 yards from the finish. I had a moment of mixed joy and anguish. Then my mind took over. It raced well ahead of my body and drew me compellingly forward. I felt that the moment of a lifetime had come. As they say, the rest is history. The crowd roared as Bannister lunged through the finish line at 3 minutes, 59 and 4/10 seconds, a new world record. Many years ago, the Reverend George Dole was one of my theological school professors. We knew that he was a brilliant scholar with degrees from Yale, Oxford, and Harvard, but we didn't know that he had been one of the runners in that historic 4-minute mile. As the race began, Dole had the inside post, lane 1, and Bannister was in lane 4. Dole got off to a good start. Chris Brasher was in the lead, closely followed by Roger Bannister. Right behind Bannister was Dole, who was running third in a field of 6 competitors. Dole finished 5th on that day, but the lessons he learned continued to be significant. So I called George, and he told me beautiful lessons about what it meant to be in that race and what that race meant for the world. One of the things he said was that there's this art of shadowing, and Bannister had perfected the art of shadowing, running just behind someone right at the shoulder and matching them stride for stride. Another lesson that was learned was how it was more than just an individual. Roger Bannister had to train with others, and he had to have a great coach, and he had to have the crowd roaring. Everything had to be right for him to break that 4-minute mile. But another powerful lesson, perhaps the most powerful lesson of the Miracle Mile, is that, I'm reading now, it demonstrates the power of possibility thinking. At the time when the scientific world believed that it was impossible for any human being to run the mile in under 4 minutes, Roger Bannister did it. In doing so, he demonstrated that both physical and psychological barriers can be broken through. 6 weeks later, John Landy also ran the mile in under 4 minutes, becoming the second man in history to do so. Within 2 years, 9 people have broken the 4-minute barrier, and today, more than 60 years later, over 6,000 people have run the mile in under 4 minutes,
Wow.
including high school students and people over the age of 40. So it was a psychological barrier, not just a physiological barrier, and he broke it. Now, we know that lots of barriers have been broken in the world. In the history of human thought, thinkers have been able to lift our idea of the possible beyond what most people imagine is achievable. Galileo revolutionized human thought when he taught that the earth revolves around the sun. The Wright brothers rose above the taunts of their skeptical critics and successfully flew the first airplane. And 60 years later, astronaut Neil Armstrong became the first man to walk on the moon. These are all physical triumphs. Now comes the most important part. In the realm of spirituality, religious leaders have always encouraged people to elevate their idea about what is possible for the human spirit. The Buddha taught that inner peace is possible for those who rise above covetous desire. Gandhi taught that changing the outer world first begins with striving to change one's inner world. And Jesus taught that instead of hating and murdering, it is possible to forgive and love one's enemy. These spiritual leaders not only taught a higher vision of what is possible, their lives also demonstrated that these spiritual aspirations are indeed achievable. What Roger Bannister achieved in the realm of athletic endeavor, you can achieve in the realm of the human spirit. With God, all things are possible. So that concludes like their introduction to the chapter. Then when they get into the chapter, there are testimonies of people who have actually kept the commandments. I'll go back to this book because you might want to hear like some of the prisoners who are striving to keep the commandment against murder. Okay, so here's a man who says, "Today would have been my 15th wedding anniversary. My wife believed in physically punishing our son to excess. I could not tolerate seeing anyone beat my son. The chasm between us grew as we went tit for tat. Knowing that I would go to prison for life when she made her last threat to beat him, I killed her. A large part of myself and many others died that day." This is a real deal. And then here's a woman, a 30-year-old mother, shares her feelings about serving a life sentence for a murder that she claims she did not commit. "Today I broke the commandment against murder. I broke it by letting an old wound reopen. Tomorrow is Mother's Day and I won't see my children. I have a lot of hate in my heart for the ones who sent me to prison on a false conviction. And I have hate in my heart for the man who murdered my daughter. Everyone tells me to forgive, but how do I forgive a man that took my child's life and didn't stop there? He took me from my other 3 children. I tell myself that I must pray harder, and I do, but on birthdays, on holidays, birthdays, and sometimes just on ordinary days, my wound reopens, and I find myself hating even more. I believe that if I had a gun in my hand and was standing in front of this man, I would actually shoot him. At least then I would be in here for something I really did." And one more from the prisoners. "Today in the chow hall, during a misunderstanding, a fellow inmate called me a name I can't mention here. It was a tense moment, and I saw friends getting ready to jump into it. My ire boiled. I was almost at the point of no return when I realized that this problem was his problem, and I should not make it mine too. So instead of letting myself be ruled by anger, I let him have it. The problem, that is. I simply walked away from it and did not let the false god of murderous anger control me. praise God for giving us this commandment. So it's lots of levels going on in the prison. In the college, I have a few examples too of students keeping this commandment. What we always like to do is tell them for 1 week, say nothing critical to or about anyone. That's your assignment for the week. Simple little assignment for the week, right?
No.
Say nothing critical to or about anyone. Let me back up a little and tell you a little story. In an address given at Hillsdale College, Rabbi Joseph Telushkin asked a group of college students to raise their hands if they thought they could go through 24 hours without saying anything critical to or about anyone. Most of the students did not raise their hands. Could you folks go through 24 hours without saying anything critical? If you
No.
could, raise your hands.
I'll try.
Okay, you try?
I'll try.
Okay, how about between now and the next time we meet, that's on Thursday. On Thursday, I'm doing the next commandment. We say nothing critical to or about anyone, including those guys out on the street.
Come on.
No exceptions here, Nancy.
When I went to school, we would have critiques, and they're creative critiques, and you need them, and you need to hear that because you need to grow. The other thing I wanted to say was the racing. He was racing against his own time. He wasn't trying to be better than somebody else, but it's all so, what you're saying sounds so like within. It's so amazing how the man was able to break that time. But it wasn't really about the other people. It wasn't about trying to be better than your neighbor. And creative criticism is about helping you to be better yourself at what you're attempting to do.
Sure.
Thank you. Let me respond to both aspects of that. So, yes, like maybe I was critical all day yesterday, and maybe today I was only critical in the morning. Whoa, that would be great. What an achievement. So that would be just measuring me against me. And I've actually done that through the years. I compare where I was to where I am. It feels so good. And this is something we can all do. We can be spiritual athletes in this way. Where's my friend Gard? Spiritual athletes. Yeah, we can get better and better at these things. And so, and also in terms of creative criticism, was it creative criticism what you said?
Yeah.
So we say if you must say something, and there are times where you must say something, say you're in an occupation where your job depends on being able to critique someone's performance, whatever it is, let it pass through 3 gates. Is this kind? Is this true? Is this useful? Kind, true, useful. Oh, that's sort of like love, wisdom, and use, isn't it? Oh, that's the Holy Trinity in the new church. Yeah. Is this kind? Is this true? Is this useful? Yeah, Pastor Corey.
I hope this passes that test. But speaking of creative criticism, I'm thinking of people who may be listening to some of our examples up there on the board, thinking, okay, that's taking "thou shalt not murder" too far. How would you reflect on that for us?
Oh, you guys are playing right into my hands. Yeah, so what we say is instead of doing these things, like I want to erase this and talk about different ways where we can use your term, see the good and uplift that in people, which is exactly what you said in the previous lecture. You know, we ended with honoring father and mother, and we really, really strive hard to get our students or whoever takes the course not to skip past honoring father and mother to honoring maybe God. No. Try really hard, like Susanna was saying, she did the Myers-Briggs and discovered there was something she could honor in her mother that was different from herself. People have had their greatest breakthroughs, some of their greatest breakthroughs, right there with that commandment to honor father and mother. And then you come into this gratitude to everyone who's been a life giver in your life, not just father and mother, but the community of saints, everyone who has uplifted and nourished you on your journey with the, quote, milk of human kindness or encouragement. And now you get to turn around and be a spirit giver, an uplifter of human souls, an encourager, a supporter. So you can do that this week. And in fact, I'm going to read you a journal entry from a college student who experienced that. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
By the way?
Yeah.
Okay. And Nancy, did I answer your question?
Yes, thank
Okay.
you.
So, so here's a college student, let's see. Okay, oh yeah, this is a good one. For this commandment, our challenge was to say nothing critical to or about anyone for a whole week.
Ooh.
To help us get started, we were given a star chart and a sheet of gummed stars. We were supposed to give ourselves stars for each portion of the day, morning, afternoon, evening. We managed to do it. That meant that I could get up to 21 stars for the week. I already knew that this commandment would be a difficult one for me. In fact, while walking back to my room after today's class, I committed murder before I even made it back to the dorm. At that point, I knew I was in for a rough week. I gave myself 3 stars for the whole week. These are the only times when I felt like I didn't commit any murder. I did notice something, though. I discovered that when I didn't commit any murder for a long time, 2 or 3 hours, something happened. I started to become a life giver. I found myself spontaneously saying nice things and doing kind things, holding doors for people, saying hi, smiling. I remember telling a guest speaker in one of my classes that I really appreciated his presentation and got a lot out of it. This is something that I don't usually do. In my next class, I told my professor that I really enjoyed the video he showed us and that it was very instructive. I didn't have any ulterior motive. I wasn't trying to be liked. I just felt like saying these things, and it felt good.
Yeah.
And I believe with my heart of hearts that when you shun those evils, the Lord, you open the door for the Lord to come in, and you're spontaneously doing things that you didn't even know you could do. You are breaking the 4-minute mile. You'll even find yourself loving your enemy. How did that happen? You were doing what Swedenborg says. Going back to this book, remember that quote? That simple little powerful quote from the Doctrine of Life? If a person shuns an evil as a sin, he comes into the good opposite to the evil. The good opposite to the evil, which is meant by murder, is the good of love towards the neighbor. So in shunning the evils, that's always the first step. We are saying, Lord, come in. Ask, and it should be granted. Knock, and it should be opened. Thank you very much. So we have 15 minutes for questions, answers, responses, comments. Yeah.
Yeah, we only have 5 minutes.
Oh, we have 5 minutes. Questions.
Just one quick comment, just the whole idea of loving your enemy struck me as a little bit of a paradox, because once you love your enemy, then they're not your enemy.
Oh, that's nice. That's really nice. Thank you. Susanna?
Well, I just wanted to say, I think we live in a society where people expect that, a lot of times they expect your interactions to be negative. And one of the practices that I have is if I ever call customer service for anything and I get a good response, I always ask to talk to their supervisor. And the first, is there something wrong? Did I not answer all your questions? I said, no, I want to tell them what a good job you did.
Right.
And they just are so taken aback by that you're offering something good for their lives when they've helped you with something for you.
Which reminds me, thank you very much. I have something for you all because you've been such a good audience. And you're going to all get one of these. And I hope that you make the most of these. But before I pass these out, there were a few, you had a question?
I had another comment. So for me, looking at this, I have to remind myself that not committing murder means to yourself too, because you can do all these things to yourself.
Very
You have
good
to
point,
remember
yeah.
to be just as kind to yourself as to others.
What I like to do, by the way, when I'm teaching is when anybody makes a response, that silence is so awkward. I like to do something enthusiastic. We usually snap fingers. Yeah, right. One or two more, then I'll give you your rewards for being such a good audience today. Yes, sir?
I'd just like to say thank you for that comment. I also know that As the commandments get deeper, when we go through the commandments, they get from the more external to the more internal. So there is another commandment later on that deals with those messages that we do for ourselves. The bearing false witness deals a lot with the murdering that goes on inside of our minds. So this one mostly focuses on others outside of us. But you're absolutely right, that is another kind of murder.
My wife Star, yeah, and I forgot to give Star credit for, we did all of this together, side by side, wrote every sentence, every word, you know, arranged every paragraph together. It really was a mutual work. George?
This is not to pat myself, but you know, I do a reflection every morning. I share it because I want it to be a jewel. When I first started, I can remember the hells who are clever saying, what are you trying to do? Be a goody two-shoes? You're doing this to build a friendship. And you know, it took strong conviction to say, out of here, I don't want to hear the goody two-shoes. This morning, I was desperate to get something on, and I opened the Word, and this verse jumped out at me, right? And I just want to read it. Be not afraid, for the Lord will be your confidence, and he will keep your foot from stepping in a snare.
Wow. Fantastic. Look how big we get those narratives going. Okay. Okay, so, you're okay. Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
I have a question about Bannister.
Yes.
When they ran that race, they put a really fast starter who could run like hell for the first third of the race.
That's right.
And they put a real fast finisher who could run.
Yes.
So it's a team that won that.
That's right.
He's a pretty lazy runner.
That's right.
He always shouts. So the coaches and the team and George Doe getting out there and making it a real race, he would have never done it by himself.
Exactly right.
So
Yeah.
he shouldn't take praise. It was a community effort that got
Right.
him off of being lazy.
Yeah.
And made him run. So
And you know what's fantastic about that? First big round of snaps there. Yeah, as a community, as a church, we're going to help and support and encourage one another in this task, which I'm now passing around.
You want some help passing it
Yes,
out, right?
I need lots of helpers to pass these around.
Take one and read it, bring it over.
Yeah, okay, while it goes around, I'll read it. Pass these around, pass these around.
And right then we have to stop.
Then we'll stop, okay.
So does shadowing help running because of the wind, the air?
Yep, that helps, yeah.
Kind of like cycling.
So the mark to aim at, do not murder. Be a life giver. In this commandment, you are called to not murder anyone, physically, emotionally, or spiritually. This includes not destroying their reputation, their character, their hopes, their dreams, their confidence, their relationships, their beliefs, and especially their spirit. If you want to say something about someone and it's not kind, true, or useful, don't say it. This includes destructive gossip, sarcastic put-downs, rude nicknames, even contemptuous eye-rolling. Don't be a killjoy. Be a spirit lifter, not a spirit killer. For 1 week, your aim is to say, for you guys, it's just for a day and a half, is to say nothing critical to or about anyone. Instead, let your words be kind, true, and useful. Encourage, inspire, be a life giver. Give it a try and see how it goes. In your journal, record your experience of practicing this commandment. Colgate.
we tried this about 10 years ago. I think it was Susanna. It was the Elastic Band.
Oh, yeah.
And everybody wasn't wearing them by lunch.
That's fantastic. Thank you all very, very much.